Okay, so after death scare with the common cold, and then the holiday hiatus, we are back with our regular study. I think we have one session in like 5 weeks with all the holidays. So we're hoping to finish Daniel by the end of the year, but now I think we'll have this session, and then I think it'll be 3 more sessions.
By the end of the year?
No, I was hoping to finish it by the end of the year, and then with the 5 missed weeks, I think got pushed into this year. So, but I think we'll have at least 3 more sessions. And this week, we're going to go backwards because we did chapter 9 with the 70 weeks of Daniel as kind of like a special class for Christmas. But we got to go back and finish up chapter 7, and chapter 7 and chapter 8 are very much tied together. And so, jumping to our outline of the book, remember the first 6 chapters are the historical narrative. They are the story of his life, and then once chapter 7 starts, we start skipping all over the place. We gotta orient ourselves each week to see where in time we are, and some of them are lumped together, some of them are sort of sequential, but it's not really apparent from the text. But these are the visions of Daniel. These are the true prophetic seeings of Daniel. In other words, he'll interpret the dreams of the king or something, but these ones are purely recorded visions that Daniel had. And we started with the vision of the 4 beasts in chapter 7, and we kind of went through that, and we ended up cutting that chapter off halfway because there's a shift in scope in chapter 7 where he goes from talking about the history of nations with the various empires that would rise and fall and conquer in the Middle East, which was basically the known world at that time. And then he shifts scope dramatically and starts talking about end times things, uses this last beast as a springboard to talk about end times things, and with a very specific focus on the Antichrist. And so from here on out, Daniel is going to get really weird. Like, we're of all the Bible, this is the supernatural of the supernatural. All of Daniel's visions are going to deal in some way with the end times, and all of them sort of circle around this figure of the Antichrist. Chapter 10, obviously chapter 9, is the 70 weeks that predicts the very day in which the Messiah would present himself as the King of Israel, and in fact it was fulfilled on the exact day that it was predicted, 800 years in advance. And then chapter 10, we sort of get like this change of scope, and Daniel gives us a view of what we call like the dark side of the demonic forces behind the nations. And then it leads to 11 and 12, where he chronicles the events that are going to happen in the so-called silent years, the years between the Testament. After the rebuilding of the temple, Nehemiah, that time frame, there's a period that's not recorded in the Bible in real time, let's call it that. But it is recorded in advance in incredible detail in chapters 11 and then some of chapter 12. But all of this is going to be very mystical. Like he gets into the powers behind these forces, and he gets into near prophecy, but then switches like things that are going to happen within the next 300 years, but at the same time prophesying about things that'll happen in the end times. And Jesus picks up on the same thing and even references back to Daniel and does the same. He references events that happened in the past, but uses them as markers for things that are going to happen in the future. So it's a little difficult to track, but I think if you take it topically like we've been doing, it all really tracks pretty easily, and you can see a consistent theme. So here we're in chapter 8, obviously. Within the timeline, we're kind of, like I said, we're all over the place, so I'm just skipping that one for now, but it's going to come up in the actual text itself. We've done this a number of times, but I think this is the part that you have to keep this in mind. Like, if you don't realize where we are on the timeline, it's really easy to say, okay, but he could have foreseen these things happening. It's also really important to remember Daniel didn't have the internet or Fox News or CNN, right? He didn't know what was happening 300 miles away. He would not have, the information didn't travel the way it travels now. And so predicting something 3 years in advance, like the rise and conquest of a bordering nation. It's not like he would have heard rumblings that they were growing. Maybe once a year you would get news from the outside world, and he was an advisor to the king, so you can think maybe he was somewhat informed. But we're talking about prophecies, even if you just give them the nearest scope, that are happening years in advance, and some of them are even then the rest of them happen entire empires in advance, like predicting the second and third consecutive ones over the one that was about to come. So it's really important, I guess, to remember that all of this is being written here during this period of this captivity, both in Babylon, and then he's taken to Persia. And it really, all of it deals with events that happened during this period we call the silent years. All the things that Daniel's going to chronicle, we look back at and say, well, that's all history, and it all kind of blends together in the rearview mirror. You look back and it's all ancient past. But Daniel's writing during the captivity of things that are going to happen hundreds of years later. And the most important thing is we have intact copies of the Vorlage, which is the basis for our texts, of our Old Testament text, that was written during the period prior to these events happening. So we can actually trace back and verify that the things that were predicted were in black and white, in writing, and we have actual copies long before they came to pass. So anyone that says, well, this must have been documented afterwards, or this must have been a forgery of some kind, because it predicts things so specifically that it could not possibly have been done before, that had some validity until about 1840, when we started discovering intact copies of the Vorlage, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we can verify with absolute certainty that the things we're going to read tonight were in writing, in black and white, and then translated into Greek even years in advance of them happening. So you can have a high degree of confidence in the things that we're reading here, and that's incredibly important. This is the period of the Greek Empire, which was, as I said, chronicled throughout Daniel and written, occurring after the Vorlage. So I think it's like one of those things that you have to keep reminding yourself that everything we're seeing here is written hundreds of years before it happened, even though to us it's all just kind of back in the shady, distant past, right? Yeah.
So Daniel wasn't in the same place the entire time of the captivity? He was in Babylon and then in Persia?
Right. So when Babylon fell, he was then taken. So his chapters 5 and 6 are written during he's in the Persian Empire. The lion's den is Darius, the king of Persia, throws him into the lion's den, and we went through the chronicle of how he ended up in there, which isn't in the book of Daniel, but is recorded elsewhere. But yeah, he is an advisor to the king of 2 successive world empires, and that alone makes his career absolutely remarkable. But the things he's predicting are so incredibly specific that it makes you wonder, like, they're so specific that you kind of have to go through why is this important to the Holy Spirit? Why does he care if we know the number of days between when Antiochus Epiphanes was going to defile the temple and when the Maccabees were going to restore it? It has no prophetic significance. Why the specificity? Is he just showing off, right? Is it for a purpose? Is there a reason for it? There's details that are laid down. Obviously, the 70 weeks of Daniel, you know exactly why he gave the specificity, so you could recognize the Messiah when he came. But there's other ones that it's like, you clearly didn't need to do that. You didn't need to name Cyrus, call Cyrus out by name. You didn't need to call the conquering empire out by name and then lay out the record of his conquest in successive order, in the order that he did them. That's specificity that can only be for a purpose, but doesn't really add anything to the prophetic scheme. It's just, so why then is he doing that? And we want to kind of address that question a little bit. So to bring us up to where we are in chapter 7, just to kind of recap what we did last time, the beginning of chapter 7 deals with these 4 beasts out of the great sea, right? And it really mirrors the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel interprets, of the statue with a head of gold and successive weakening metals, where Daniel says these are successive world empires and lays out the history of these great conquering empires from Babylon to Persia to Greece to Rome in two parts. So we have that one in our back pocket, and this one in chapter 7 really just adds on to that. Now starts describing these world empires as if they're voracious beasts, as if they're consuming beasts. And he picks animals that have characteristics that are consistent with the way each empire conquered. He calls the Babylonian Empire a lion, and just the descriptions are incredible. Like, we went through that and spent an entire class just going through how specific those descriptions of each successive world empire are. And it was all written before Persia was even a united empire. Remember, Persia is the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medians and the Persians were no match for the Babylonians. And so a guy named Cyrus melded the two, and they became the Medo-Persian Empire, and he then conquered Babylon. At the time Daniel's writing, they were both warring with each other, and he writes of the conquest of the Medo-Persians. Greece is entirely irrelevant. It's not even a city-state. It's a bunch of warring cities that are fighting amongst each other. He writes about it overthrowing the Persian Empire, and then he writes about Rome. Rome isn't even established. Rome isn't even it's not even a village at that point. And he tells about the Roman conquest. So the specificity of this is absolutely incredible. And I won't go through each of the descriptions again, because we did that in tremendous detail. But just to kind of give you a picture, the Star of David on here is obviously Jerusalem. The other star is Babylon. And you get a sense the Persian Empire was enormous. The Persian Empire overthrew the Babylonian Empire and took about double the land that the Babylonian Empire had, and it becomes by far the largest of the empires, from Egypt all the way to India, and it was absolutely enormous. They could field a 5 million man standing army with all their conquests. That's big today. Back then, that's unheard of. And Daniel's predicting the prophecies that he's given are before this even rises, and you can't even imagine the unlikelihood of anyone conquering the Babylonians while he's sitting there in power in Babylon. But he calls out that the Persians will conquer the Babylonians, and then he says another world empire, another leader will come along, and they will conquer the Persians, and very specifically calls out that the Greek Empire will come. That's Greece compared to the Persian Empire. But even more astonishing, Alexander the Great, who led the Greeks, wasn't even Greek. He was Macedonian. He was an even smaller state to the north of Greece. If you've heard of Philip of Macedon, he was in himself a pretty famous conqueror. That was Alexander the Great's father. And so Alexander the Great takes over when he's 20 years old and first conquers Greece. He's Macedonian. First conquers Greece, and then unites those two and goes out and conquers the known world. And that's predicted in 3 different passages in Daniel, including very specifically in the statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the four beasts, and then here in chapter 8, we're going to get into some wild detail. But that notwithstanding, he also goes on to talk about that there will be a subsequent world empire, and calls out the Roman Empire before Rome was even, it was barely even populated. We're not talking like there were city-states up there. It was nothing. Greece was about the furthest extent of real civilized culture. And so you really have to wrap your head around how wild that would sound to someone in Babylon. That Babylon could ever fall to begin with, they probably thought he was a lunatic. Then to go through this successive, there is no string that you could say, well, maybe he followed this logical trail that this might have happened and that might have happened. There's no world in which the Greeks should have ever been able to conquer the Persians. But we talk about that in great detail. And so that's kind of the background as we switch to the end of chapter 7. So chapter 6 gives us 4 beasts, and then the first is like a lion, the second like a bear, the third like a leopard. It's fast-moving, which is the Grecian Empire. And then there's this last one that he doesn't even know what to compare it to. The rest of them, he gives animals that sort of describe it. The 4th beast he just calls a great and terrible beast, right? And that is the prediction of the Roman Empire. It says it has iron teeth. Rome was distinct from every other world conqueror, and the rest of all these others took pride in what they could consume, what they could build, what they could assimilate. They would conquer, and Greeks converted the entire world to speaking Greek, and they were very proud of spreading culture and language. The Romans took pride in what they could destroy. They didn't care what they left behind. They didn't care. They took pride in destruction. They would wipe out if you didn't capitulate, they would literally wipe out every living soul. They would starve out entire countries through walled sieges, and very much took pride. They were very different from the subsequent or the prior conquerors. And so when it talks about that great and terrible beast, Rome was not the same. There's a reason we still talk about Rome today more than any of the other empires. They conquered ruthlessly and absolutely. Didn't leave any culture behind, converted the entire world, became Roman. And so they left their mark more than anything. But this beast that was described had horns on its head and was very different from the others. And Daniel recognizes that there's something different about this fourth beast. And so he says, I considered the horns on this fourth beast, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the root, and behold, in his eyes were like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld till their thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and hair in his head was pure as wool. His throne was like fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth before him. Thousands and thousands upon thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. Right? Clear as can be, right? I mean, you can see why Daniel's puzzled. He's seeing this thing of, I'm confused why one of the beasts has horns, and then a small horn grows up from the midst and uproots 3 of the other horns, and then all of a sudden people are worshiping something else after one horn uproots the others, and he's confused, and rightfully so. But the rest of them made sense to him. He didn't ask about any of the first ones. He kind of had an idea what was going to happen. There's going to be a powerful, large country that conquers. This one confuses him, right? So this idea, I want you to keep in mind this idea of another little horn. For some reason, they use this idiom in several places throughout prophecy. When you see this idea of a little horn, that is, without exception, going to be a reference to the Antichrist. That's one of those expositional constancies where, I don't know why, a horn is always a symbol of power. We know that throughout the Bible. A horn is a symbol of power, but this little horn refers to the Antichrist. It's almost a cheat code in prophecy. When you see that, think forward, think Antichrist. I think it's symbolized as a little horn because he comes to power not as a military conqueror. He comes to power as a peacemaker, and that he's doing this against his will, reluctantly boosted into power by the people, as opposed to Alexander the Great, who's depicted as the big horn. He takes his spot. So you've got this concept of a little horn, and think of that like a cheat code. Without any explanation, you get another prophecy. That should trigger your mind to say, oh, we're talking about future events in the Antichrist. And one of the other things, if there is a being that is running off his mouth or speaking great blasphemies or things against the Most High, it is almost always the Antichrist. We use that term, the Antichrist, to refer to this character, this embodied, the satanically imbued being that's coming, but it's probably the least descriptive term out there. He's not in any way the opposite of Christ. He's not anti-Christ. He might be opposed to Christ, but he's not an equal to. He's a human that Satan empowers. And that term is only used once, and it's not even used to describe him. It's used to describe the spirit of Antichrist that's in him by Paul. Yep.
I remember David commenting on the blasphemy by Goliath.
Yeah, there's a lot of types that come out of it, and again, same thing. When you see someone spouting off their mouth, but it's always not just blasphemy in general, but like words against the Most High God. When someone's intentional, you should also go, is there any chance this is a type of the Antichrist, these type of things? And in a lot of ways, you can play that game with David and Goliath and the Antichrist taking and David's seed. In fact, Jesus is called David. We await the return of David on several occasions. And my prince, I will place David upon my throne. And those are terms referring to Christ. So again, just we use it. Antichrist stuck for some reason. But if there's one term that's descriptive of him throughout the Bible, there are 56 different occasions where the Bible refers to him as like the man of great blasphemies, a man who spoke great things against the Most High. It's almost always a description of the Antichrist when it talks about an individual who speaks against God. So you got two kind of like cues as to where we're going with this great and terrible beast, right? And we kind of have to orient ourselves a little bit with that. But so Daniel continues. He still doesn't have an explanation. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. This horn is speaking blasphemies, and he's watching going, what is going on? I beheld even until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. Their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Who is one like the Son of Man? Who is Jesus? Without a doubt. Who is the Ancient of Days? The Father. So he's now seeing at the time of this beast's conquest, at the time this beast is conquered, he sees this one like the Son of Man brought before the Father. Right? This is starting to sound right. Now this is starting to line up. And there was given to him dominion and glory and a kingdom. All the people, nations, languages will serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed. Again, now we're feeling pretty good. We know that guy, right? That's easy prophecy for us. And that's easy prophecy for Daniel too, someone who knows their scripture. There's this dichotomy where they didn't see Christ for who he was supposed to be. You recognize that the Jews are awaiting their Messiah, but they don't recognize a passage like this, that one like the Son of Man was brought before the Ancient of Days and was given dominion to rule forever and ever and ever. And then when someone says, I am the Son of God, they say, wait, no, the Messiah isn't supposed to be the Son of God. Well, then why is this person coming and reigning forever and ever and ever, right? So there's a selective lens that you see that the Jews of Jesus' time missed. They had an idea of what they were expecting for the Messiah, and it was a man. It was a conqueror, and it's the same thing. You want to talk about a type of David. What did the Jews want in a king? They wanted powerful. They wanted a military man. They wanted a giant. Saul's called a giant among men. And when they saw Saul, they demanded, make him our king, right? They had an idea of who he was supposed to be, and it wasn't God's idea. They didn't see David. They didn't see a kid coming, right? And that was not the expectation. But that's what God had in mind. And it's always kind of a similar theme, right? They had this view of the Messiah. They love all the prophecies about him coming to conquer and to make war with their enemies and to destroy and to trod them underfoot. And then they ignore the ones where he's, slain and lifted up. And so it's all the lens that they're viewing it through. But I want you to keep in mind what it says here. It says, the Son of Man goes before the Ancient of Days, and he is given the world. He is given a kingdom and power to last for 1,000 years, right? No, forever and ever and ever, right? This is an everlasting dominion that's given to him. Okay, and now it continues. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast. So now he's really confused, and he's like, I do not get what's going on with this beast. I recognize what's going on with God and his ruling forever, but I don't understand the beast. Take me back there, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with his feet. And the 10 horns that were in his head, and of which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows, I behold, and the same horn came and made war with the saints and prevailed against them. until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given unto the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Wait a second. But didn't we just hear that the Son of Man came before the Father, and he was given the kingdom, and he would possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever? Now we see the saints of the Most High, which is the followers. That's the church. It's not. This is something that's not clear here, but we'll get into that. But it seems to be we got a contradiction here, right? We got a group of people, a group of that are not the Son of Man, who are given the kingdom to possess forever and ever. When 3 verses before we just said you can't have 2 people that were just given it, then you don't have it, right? You have half of it at best, or you're sharing power. So there's something else going on here. Thus he said. So now this is the being that he'd been speaking to, is revealing what he saw, right? Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. Okay, very good. We know that one. We know that from the statue. We know that we kind of oriented ourselves based on our outlook looking back at history, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So 10 rulers, 10 authorities that shall come out of this 4th conqueror. And another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the times and the law. The times in the law are very specific, right? What are the times in the law? The ordinances and the Jewish law. We're not talking about someone coming in and establishing, people say, well, this is part of the argument for a one world empire. No, he's doing away with Judaism. This person is coming in and changing the times, very specific times, the ordinances, the feast days, and the laws, the Mosaic law. So it's a very specific reference. The concept behind this one world empire comes elsewhere, but that is not what's in view here. Yep. Not a word. Yep, good. You're a slide ahead of me, but that's another point. It's not used elsewhere. The Jews are not referred to as the saints anywhere else in the Old Testament.
And they didn't use the word.
There's a word for it, but it's like the anoint. The word here is the anointed of, which is only used of whom in the Old Testament. Who is the anointed? Kings. The kings were anointed, the judges were anointed, and the Messiah would be anointed. They certainly didn't refer to themselves as the anointed. And so that word is very, very specifically used in this context. So he gives us this idea of who that beast is, a kingdom like the others, and it will subdue. But then there's going to be some things that come out of it, right? There will be 10 kingdoms that come out of that beast and survive, and then there will be this one empire, this one other kingdom that comes out and subdues the rest of them, and it's that little horn, right? Okay, so he will do away with let's see. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, a times, and a dividing of times. We know that one, right? Mm-hmm. This is a very well-documented period of time. Time is 1. Times in Hebrew is a plural. So 1 and 2, and a dividing of times, 3.5. So he'll be given into their hands for a period of 3.5 years. It's a direct reference to the Great Tribulation, the 3.5 years that the Antichrist will persecute the Jews and anyone faithful to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Anyone who comes to Christ during that period of time, he will persecute. We just went through, we're skipping ahead because we did this last time. Chapter 9 talks about the 70 weeks of Daniel, and we had to do this huge, tough equation where we said, hey, but if you use 360-day years, then it turns out to be the exact day that Jesus, enters. And you might say, well, that kind of seems arbitrary. That's what the Julian calendar used, which was in place. But how do we know that? We know that because it says here it's 3.5 years, and then it says in another place the exact number of days it will be, and it adds up to 3.5 years if you use 360-day years to the day. So the Holy Spirit anticipated that argument against it and said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and put this 3.5 years, and it's both in Daniel into days so that nobody can say 3.5 years is exactly this many days divided by 360, you have your years. So we've got that argument anticipated and taken care of. Let's see. So it will be given into their hands for the great tribulation. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it unto the end. The kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Okay, that's another one where that should really cause some problems if you're an Old Testament believer, right? God's kingdom is now going to be given to the saints, to the anointed of God. That concept is nowhere else in the Old Testament. God rules supreme. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is the supreme ruler. He shares power with no one. You will not find him sharing power and dominion over the kingdom, over anything, anywhere in the Old Testament. So this is shocking to find in one place that he gives it to one like the Son of Man, and then verses later it seems to be that he gives it to the saints of the Most High, which again,
somewhere that we will rule with him.
yes. Well, that's New Testament though. You're cheating. You're cheating. You've got too much spirit in you. We have to get back to the point before any of this, because that's part of what Paul's doing in his entire ministry. So we go through that and we see the two squares. There's these contradictions that I'm going to do a whole separate slide on here. But what's laid out here is lost a little bit in the scope of the beast and the horns and the fact that there's a little horn that grows eyes and starts talking and then uproots other ones. But when you just kind of break down the explanation that the angel gives, and the angel is Gabriel, we already knew that one. 3 different times he says that Gabriel is speaking to him. The text says the fourth beast has 10 horns that grow out of it. The 11th horn, this little horn, grows later and plucks up 3 original horns. The little horn defies and opposes God. He speaks great blasphemies. He makes war against the saints and prevails. His dominion will last for a times, and a dividing of times. His destruction will occur when the Ancient of Days establishes his throne on the earth. That's a very familiar story. If we get back to Revelation 13 and 14, we all know that one. Right? If you just kind of break it down to what's going on in the metaphor. And so, we know this story real well. 10 nations arise out of this final world empire. Out of the Roman Empire, 10 nations come out, and each has dominion at some point. At this later time, in the end times, that final day, I think is the terminology it uses. At a later time, an 11th kingdom arises and conquers 3 of the originals. So the presumption is there's 3 original that are still controlling, and then at this end time, another kingdom rises out of the Roman Empire. Now, we have to be careful as Westerners to think, we have Western history in mind and think of Rome as Europe, right? We think of Rome as the white people because we're the white people, and that's kind of the lens that we've had history pushed to us. Do not forget that the eastern leg of the Roman Empire outlasted the western leg by nearly 1,000 years. Eastern Europe, the Constantinople, Constantine moves the capital of Rome from Rome to Constantinople because he's tired of the politics, and the eastern leg of the Roman Empire is the dominant force of the world, like up into the 1000s, up into the 1100s. So it outlasts Western. So when you say the Antichrist and this last kingdom comes out of the Roman Empire, it is far more likely that it comes out of the Arabic states, the Turkey, Eastern Europe. That's the predominant force of the Roman Empire. We just kind of have a tainted lens because we tend to follow the history that leads to us. That's kind of human nature. So at some point out of this Roman Empire, another kingdom will rise, and that kingdom will be the thing that dominates the earth in the latter days. The king of this is very clearly the Antichrist. There's no question if you study other prophecy that the little horn speaking great blasphemies is a direct reference to this individual who will come and lead the reunited Roman Empire, or whatever you call it. After the rapture, he persecutes the Jews. The reason I add that after the rapture is because it says he will make war against the saints and he will prevail against them. What did Jesus say about the church? The gates of hell shall not prevail against you. The church is gone. Whatever's happening here, either you don't trust Jesus and his word directly. That one's a 1-for-1. If they're prevailing against the saints, the church is gone. So there's a direct link here to be able to tie it back to this period. And it won't go into the whole argument of pre-tribulation or post-tribulation rapture. We really beat that to death when we went through Revelation. But this is just another one of those places where if this satanic inspired world leader is prevailing against the saints, we have to presume the church is gone. So, or else Christ's word failed, which is a tougher thing for me to believe than this weird concept of Christians disappearing and floating into the nether. I'd rather believe that than believe Christ was incorrect in his promise to the church. So, and so then it takes us into this period that's the Great Tribulation, and we know that from Revelation 13 and 14 that the Great Tribulation ends with the second coming and establishing of this 1,000-year reign of Christ. But again, want to just make sure we're using that term correctly. There is a 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, but Christ's reign is forever and ever eternal. That is a location statement. That 1,000 years is a location statement, and it's also a statement that deals with us, because during that period, Satan will be captive, and we will live in a perfect utopia, and then once again, he'll be released, and we'll be given the opportunity to sin and reject him again. So that 1,000 years has to do with us, has nothing to do with him. His reign will be eternal. So when you change your lens on this fourth beast and this prophecy, it makes sense, and it really lines up with some of the things that we're talking with, the things that we already know from Revelation as New Testament Christians. But there's one thing in here that is absolutely unique to this chapter that is worth noting. And that's kind of the dichotomy we just talked about. Paul says in Ephesians, it says, for we are members of his body, of his flesh. Speaking of Christ, we are members of his body, of his flesh and his bones. For this reason, man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That for this reason is not right. It means it's like unto, in the same manner as, right? So he's saying in the same manner as a woman will leave her father and mother and cleave and become one with her husband, we will leave the world and cleave and become one with the body of Christ. So it's the language there kind of throws some people off, but it's very clearly saying in the same manner as, and so the image we get is to be wedded to him and to become one flesh with Christ. And then Paul says, this is a great mystery. And it's mysterion. It's the Greek word mysterion. It's not mystery like a guessing game type of thing. It's something unknown that is now being revealed. And so the mystery of the church, that there is this body of believers that would become one with Christ, is a mystery that is not revealed anywhere else in the text. It's not explained, but Paul calls it his unique privilege to reveal the mystery of the church, right? That's one of the things that Paul talks about pretty frequently, that one of his great privileges was to reveal the mystery of the church, and that church being as the body of Christ. Yep.
And another name for the church is the bride.
Right, the bride of Christ. And that's why marriage is just a walking analogy. It's like not a social construct. It's something that's created in the Bible that the rest of the world picked up on, but it's created to be an image of what we aspire to. It is really incredible. We've done I think we did an entire class on that.
Doesn't he talk about that the mystery will be known to the principalities and the rulers and the dark?
In chapter 3 of Daniel?
No, Ephesians.
Oh, Ephesians. Yeah. Yep, exactly. So that's part of he's building on, like, this was not known before. It was alluded to, it was pointed to, but I'm going to tell you what it all means, and everyone will know. Like, this is going to be something when Christ establishes his kingdom, they will all know, because we'll, as that chapter 3, will rule alongside him as a kingdom of priests. And so it won't be a mystery for long, but Paul's privilege that's very unique to him is that he is the one that's able to reveal what passages in the Old Testament are alluding to that don't make sense otherwise. And that's where we get to this Daniel 7. It does not make sense if you are academically or biblically oriented in any sense in the Old Testament to say that the Ancient of Days gives his dominion to this person called the Son of Man. That's not a messianic concept. They didn't think of the Messiah as being given God's power, that he was an anointed leader that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh would send to deliver them. But this idea that God would relinquish his authority on earth to this Son of Man is nowhere else found. Go ahead.
Since Jesus is the visible expression of God according to Hebrews?
Yeah.
What was the thought there? Son of Man. To me, when I see Son of Man, I always think he's on earth at that moment.
Right, and that's a forward-looking statement. It calls it all the way back to Adam, where he's referred to as the second Adam, and that he has to be. But one of the biggest requirement, the absolute biggest requirement of the Messiah, was that he had to be a man. Right, he had to be, for someone to take on our sins, he had to become man, so that he could stand in our place. You couldn't have like a dog take on our sins, and you couldn't have the opposite direction, a deity, because they hadn't suffered, they hadn't done these things. And so according to this law, and John, in Revelation, we see John reiterate that, where he says, the angel comes to him with the scroll and says, who is worthy to release the scroll and read these things and to redeem the earth, basically. Who is worthy to redeem the earth? And it says, I looked in heaven and on earth and below the earth, and no man was found worthy to loose the scroll and release. So we know it had to be a man. So this title of Son of Man becomes one of the most common messianic references in the Old Testament. But he's not associated with deity in most of them. In the Old Testament, he's not given, it's not associated with deity. It's specific to the Messiah. There are many prophecies that then reveal his nature, but he's not called God. The Messiah isn't called one with God until we see that in the New Testament, other than like a couple of places. But here, the peculiar thing is that we have the Father, the Ancient of Days is very clearly the Father, relinquishing his everlasting dominion to this person, this Son of Man. And the Jews would have recognized, well, that's the Messiah.
In the New Testament, it says when they see him coming in the clouds, he's the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's tying him back to that he is the Jewish Messiah. So you see God relinquishing to this person, but then you also see the most bizarre statement. Judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion. So whoever these people are, there's multiple, to consume and destroy it in the end. And the kingdom and dominion and greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Something's wrong there, right? We have to acknowledge something's missing. So first of all, God gave it to this Son of Man, and then he somehow shares it with these saints. And again, that term is not a common term, and yet it's used in 3 different places here to be synonymous with this person, this personage that receives the kingdom. And so this is one of the best examples of the church is revealed in the Old Testament in several places. Unless you know, unless you're paying attention, unless you understand, you would likely miss it. We now, with hindsight, can see that's an Old Testament reference to the church. And Paul is going through, his ministry is to go through and say, this is the promise. So even right here in Daniel, it's promising that the everlasting kingdom will be given to the Messiah, and then the saints, his saints, will be given the kingdom. They will rule, as we see, alongside him as a kingdom of priests. But even more, Romans says, we will be one with him. More so, we will be joint heirs with Christ. We stand to inherit everything, he stands to inherit. That is a clarification of these two seemingly opposed statements. We are joint heirs. Whatever the Ancient of Days gives him in verse 11, he gives to the saints of the Most High here as well, right? That is a description of being joint heirs. And that is what Paul couldn't wrap his head around, that I could be considered one with Christ and a joint heir to inherit alongside him, whatever it is he inherits.
And it says speaking of the millennium.
This is
Earth, but I know
forever.
with him before eternity.
Right. Wherever he is, we will always be. And we will always be one with him. We will never be separated from him. So if he rules forever and ever, we know we will rule forever and ever. And it says exactly that. They are given an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey. Right? That's the exact same parallel. Whatever he was given, we're given. And I added the additional references if you want to dig into that. There are several. These are some other places where it talks about the Old Testament revealing the church, revealing that there would be a body that's one with Christ, that inherits alongside him. And that's a concept that belongs nowhere in Judaism. It's unique to the followers of Christ and revealed right there in Daniel. So love that one. The specificity of chapter 7 is incredible. Most of that specificity is around these four kingdoms that really blows you away. But with the shifting focus to the Antichrist, it follows this theme. And so then chapter 8 is almost a continuation of the end of chapter 7. This is a separate vision at a separate time, but the reason they were put together in the text is because you'll see there's really a thematic thing. He's going to do the near prophecy, and then he's going to jump right at the end and start talking about the Antichrist. So notice as we're going through this one, we'll go through this one a little faster, but notice the similarities. And again, the specificities of this leaves you with the impression that God's just showing off. Like there is no possible value to some of these details other than to show that he is outside the time domain and calling the end from the beginning. But chapter 8 says, in the third year of the king Belshazzar. So where are we? Where's Daniel? If Belshazzar's in his third year, Babylon. Babylon hasn't even fallen yet. We're still 6 years. So the third year of Belshazzar, seventh year of Belshazzar is when the handwriting on the wall. So we're 4 years from when it's even conquered. The Medo-Persian Empire is not even united at this point. They're still battling each other, and he's sitting there in Babylon, in the most impenetrable city in the world that history has ever known, and he gets a vision of this conquest, right, of something that's about to happen. So we're still early. This is not into the Persian conquest, but it says, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time, in the same manner. So that's why they got lumped together. So he's saying, this one's like that last one, in the same manner that appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, where we got lost in some of these terminologies, but you have to take it back to the table of nations that in Genesis it gives us, because countries change all the time, but one thing that doesn't change is your ancestors. And so you can figure out where in the Bible we're talking about at any point in human history by just going back to the table of nations and saying, well, Elam settled here. Oh, it's talking about that area. It's Persia, right? And so Elam conquered. That's the same thing with like Gog and Magog. How do we know where Gog and Magog is? Because the table of nations says that Magog settled in the farthest reaches of the northeast. And so you got that table of nations. You can track down most of Bible prophecy by who are their ancestors. They always refer back to Genesis. They're using the Bible as its own map. So when you say Shushan, that's kind of disturbing because he's still a captive in Babylon, but that's the capital of Persia. Shushan, he somehow was transported years in advance to the capital of Persia. Elam is Persia. Elam is the historic, that's the ancestors of this area that's the modern day Persia at his time. So in a vision, he's taken to the capital of Persia and by a river that runs alongside the capital of Persia, though he probably never went there, right? He was a captive, he was a minister in Babylon, and that was a warring neighbor state. So you get the sense that this might be about the Persian Empire because he's immediately taken there, and you don't appreciate that unless you get into the Table of Nations. But I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai, again in Persia, and I lifted up my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. If we've been paying attention as we went through the beasts, right, we know that the ram, as was the symbol that Cyrus wore the head of a ram into battle. That was his helmet. He wore the head of a ram, and their sigil was a ram. And so this one, well, you could say maybe he'd heard of that. Maybe he knew of this Persian Empire. Except, once again, the Medo-Persian Empire hadn't formed yet. Cyrus wasn't even in control. He adopted that sigil after they united. And this is the same kind of terminology used as 2 horns, right? The Medo and the Median and the Persian Empire. The Median was the stronger, and that was Cyrus's father's empire. He is half Median, half Persian, and he unites them. But the Persians come to dominate the Medians. The second horn, one is bigger, and so his empire comes and dominates his father-in-law's, I should say, and takes over. And Cambius is kind of rebellious against him, and he takes over. So it's a perfect description of how the Medo-Persian allied, and that one of the 2 that would ally would become greater. And so 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last, the second one to join, the Persians. And I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. How specific can you be? That's literally the direction it came from. Persia is in the far east, southeast, and it conquered in those exact directions. That's towards the Holy Land, right? We got the map here we've used several times. We'll pull it up here in a minute. And then he says, so that no animal could withstand him. I like that. He calls right back to chapter 7, right? We're using beasts, none of the former beasts, nothing, there's nothing that could withstand this ram as it conquered, including the lion, which was Babylon. Nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So we're all on the same page. That's a reference to Cyrus. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came up from the west and across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. That's the same terminology used with respect to the leopard as it moved. Remember, the leopard had wings and moved as if not touching the ground. Its conquest is incredibly fast. That's given the image that it moves so quickly it's not even touching the earth. And had a great and notable horn. And we just talked about this a little bit, that this is going to be a reference to Alexander the Great. We always think of it as the Grecian Empire. Alexander the Great was Macedonian. Their symbol was a goat. The Macedonian, Philip of Macedon, had a 2-horned goat helmet that he wore, and it's well documented in history that was the sigil of the Macedonian Empire. The Macedonians conquered the Greeks, and then we know that one notable horn came out of it. There is one ruler that came out of that Grecian Empire that's even relevant, and that individual is probably one of the most noteworthy people in human history. He took over from Philip when he was 20 years old. By the time he was 26 years old, they say he fell on his bed crying that there were no more worlds left to conquer. In 6 years, he had conquered all the way from Greece down into Egypt, all into the Hindu flats, and had overthrown the Persian Empire. The most incredible military conquest in human history by a long shot, and by far the most brutal in terms of the speed but they assimilated culture, so they didn't wipe out. They destroyed armies, but they didn't wipe out cities like the Romans did. They didn't destroy entire populations for the sport of it. So he has a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram, who had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran at him with furious power. I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with great rage against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. If anyone's seen the movie 300, right, with Gerard Butler, right, there's the Battle of Thermopylae, where the legend has it that 300 Spartans defeated. That is the battle that's referred to as Alexander the Great, when he first comes to power, just starts goading the Persian Empire, just starts doing raids into the northern section, no intent to attack, but gets them to fully commit, and at the time Xerxes Longimanus he leads a 2 million man army up to conquer, and along the way loses about half his force through a whole series of terrible events. But then at the Battle of Thermopylae, the Macedonians defeat the Persians, and he had brought so many of his forces that it just forever crippled. And once that battle was over, Alexander the Great just follows full tail behind him and wipes out most of the Persian Empire within like a period of 18 months, because they brought far too many forces and didn't leave anyone to defend the rest of the conquered areas. And so that was the way that Alexander the Great ended up taking the world, was that one battle kind of broke the Persians. So he breaks his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to withstand him after breaking those horns. When he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. So similar terminology, but the precision of this, and once again I'm going to say this too many times, and this is while Babylon was so dominant that when the Persians encircled 4 years later, the king of Babylon throws a party for thousands of his nobles and doesn't even man the walls, right? That's the story of chapter 5, is he's so confident in their security and their power that he doesn't even bother to defend themselves. And Cyrus ends up overthrowing the Babylonian Empire. But Daniel's writing this years before that, when the entire world thought there was nothing that could conquer Babylon. And now he just laid out the next 2 successive world leaders, and not only that, how they would conquer. So incredible precision. Therefore the male grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken. And in its place, 4 notable horns came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. The four winds is always used to just mean like the directions. In every direction. They came up and conquered everywhere, like in totality. That prediction itself is absolutely insane. The horn was broken. He died at 32 years old, very young. Most accounts say of some weird venereal disease, and he was an insane degenerate. But like, he died of a venereal disease when he was 32 years old. When Lysimachus, who was his tutor, came to him and said, "Who should the kingdom go to?" He said, "Give it to the strong." He wanted civil war. He knew exactly what do you think when someone says that? Give it to whoever can take it. And so his 4 generals, which are Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, are the 4 leaders of his empire. They're dispersed throughout the empire. They hear this, and they immediately claim the area that they're in. And so that's how we get the Seleucid Empire, which you've all heard of, the Ptolemaic Empire, which is famous in Egypt and is applicable to the pre-biblical days. And then Europe is Cassander and Lysimachus, and they all spend the next 300 years warring against each other, which allows for the Roman Empire to conquer, because they were so powerful, you never could have taken it, except the fact that they were just killing each other. And that's going to be detailed in insane detail in chapter 11. But think about the unlikelihood of this. A horn grows out of this empire, it's broken, and it becomes 4 lesser horns. That's the exact number of people that would claim and divide the kingdom. Like, that is insane to get that kind of precision. And out of them came a little horn. Right? Here we go. Okay, so now I want to introduce this character. I'm going to do it a little early, named Antiochus Epiphanes. He was son of Antiochus the Great. He was Seleucid. He was like the leader of the Seleucid Empire. And he becomes one of the most prolific types of the Antichrist. He's used several times. Even Christ points to him as a type of the Antichrist. And he'll be referenced, his actions will be referenced 5 different times in the Bible as the terminus quo, the tipping point of the Antichrist's rise. And then when he turns on his treaties and begins the Great Tribulation, is this thing we've all heard of as the abomination that causes desolation. And so Jesus, who's writing in 20 AD, says, as spoken of, when you see the abomination of desolation as spoken by Daniel the prophet, so long after when Antiochus Epiphanes was there, standing in the Holy of Holies, then flee to the wilderness. So even Jesus says this thing that's being pointed to is the sign. It's a type. He calls it a type. He calls Antiochus Epiphanes a type of the Antichrist. he was a monster. So the Seleucid Empire goes to war with the Ptolemaic Empire, actually conquers Egypt, but by then all these are starting to crumble. Rome's the real powerhouse, and Rome tells him, leave Egypt. Mark Antony comes down and takes Egypt, and he voluntarily leaves Egypt, but on his way back, he is angry, and he calls himself Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes is the illustrious one. The Jews called him Antiochus Epimanes, the madman. And so he comes back, and on an insane rant, just desecrates Jerusalem, all of Judea, and outlaws the practice of Judaism, wants to make that a buffer state between the Ptolemaic Empire and the Seleucid Empire, and just no one lives there. So he decides he is going to kill every man, woman, and child in Israel, outlaws Judaism, and then goes into the Holy of Holies, sacrifices a pig on the altar, and declares himself to be God. That event is what triggers the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt. They'd had enough finally. They'd had enough of this, and Judas Maccabee and his sons gather a revolt, and they overthrow the Seleucid Empire, and then they rededicate the temple. And that is what we celebrate at Hanukkah, right? The Maccabean revolt leads to rededication of the temple. And so his abomination that causes desolation in this case, or his abomination, the great abomination, there is one thing you can do that is worse than all other things, and that is to go into the Holy of Holies and defile the place, right? And so then that's what Jesus is pointing to. When you see something like this happen, you've seen it before. When you see it again, that is the turning point. That's the terminus quo of the entire Great Tribulation. Then flee to the wilderness. The Great Tribulation is about to begin. And so Christ uses Antiochus Epiphanes as a type of this Antichrist. So when it starts talking about the little horn, we're going to see it describe things that he's going to do, but it will be a type of the Antichrist. And Christ specifically calls that out. So he says, and out of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land, towards Israel. So look at the map and see which direction the Seleucid Empire conquers. Toward the south, toward the east, and towards the Holy Land. And it reached toward the host of heaven. That's a term that's used prophetically to refer to, they don't use saints, but they will use host of heaven to mean the believing, faithful remnant of the Jews. And host of heaven is rough because that seems to indicate like an army, but it's those bound for heaven, or the population of heaven is. Yeah, he's referring to the Jews, right? So it's saying that this being will reach out toward the host of heaven. So he'll reach his hand toward the Jews and cast down some of that host. So he'll destroy some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground. Another term, right? Remember Joseph's dream? Who's the stars, the sun, and the moon? Is the tribes of Israel, right? The stars were all the tribes. And so throughout the Old Testament, that's another constancy when you see them used. Yep.
In Revelation, aren't the stars
The church. The angels of the churches are also used. So the faithful. The stars are used in the Old Testament to refer to, that's kind of a mixed bag, because yes, it says who holds these stars in his hand, and that's a reference to the churches that were in chapter 1, 2, and 3. So
and that could actually be Jews and Gentiles.
possibly, yeah, because one of the churches we know is I'll say we know. One of the churches I am absolutely certain is the Messianic Jews, right? The Church of Philadelphia that is by far Jewish. And so could very well be it's the faithful remnant of whatever. So this being reaches out his hand towards the Jews and casts some of them down and tramples them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, the prince of the Jews, the Messiah, and by him the daily sacrifice were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And so this person, who's yet future to Daniel, we know he's describing the actions of Antiochus Epiphanes. Because of this transgression, an army was given to the little horn, to oppose the daily sacrifice, and he cast truth down to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. Then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to that certain one who was speaking, "How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation?" and the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. How long is it going to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days. It's a weird use of days because it's the same days we get in Genesis. It's the Arab and Boker. It's the evening and the morning. I don't know why it's there. Scholars are really divided on why it chooses to use that instead of the normal word for days, but it says evening and mornings, which are the same they're used in creation. Then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. It is no coincidence that the book of Maccabees, not biblical, but it's a historical account of the Jews. The book of Maccabees gives us the days and the years from Antiochus' first conquest of the Jews and his war against them and the outlawing of Judaism until the final revolt of the Maccabees, and it ends up being 2,300 days. Right? So he predicts that it'll be defiled. They'll be defiled for that long, and it's to the day. So there are scholars that will say the book of Maccabees is certainly later. That one's most definitely after the silent years, that they adjusted the dates to match this. That they must have they gave different dates so that it coincided with the 2,300. That's just an argument to try to get away from the historical account. The book of Maccabees is inspired, so I don't really care, but I think it's pretty incredible that he gives 2,300 days, and that's the period in which Antiochus desecrated the temple. So again, it's painting this picture so that there is a narrative, and Daniel's going to refer to that again in chapter 9. Remember he says, then he shall confirm a covenant. This is talking of the Antichrist, right? This is very clearly at the end, but he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 for 1 7. But in the middle of that week, 3.5, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall be one that makes desolate. And at the end of it, at the very fringe, there will be an abomination that is unacceptable, even until the consummation which is determined and poured out on the desolate. So in chapter 9, Daniel points to this point. Jesus, looking backwards, points to this as something that, just like when you saw Antiochus do it, he says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, which is exactly what they called this act of Antiochus Epiphanes, when it happens again, when you see him standing in the Holy of Holies, then flee to the wilderness. So they've made a type of this action that Jesus is pointing to as a trigger point for the end times. Okay, so all of this, the ram and the he-goat, it's to me, it seems crystal clear if all you had was chapter 7 that describes the 4 beasts. But just in case we didn't fully appreciate this, and again, I must remind you, this is in black and white long before it ever happened. It says, then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a voice between the banks of the Iliah who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. What a treat. This is one that we're actually going to understand. We don't have to speculate. We just went through all my crap for the last half an hour, which was totally meaningless, because he's just going to tell you what it means. This is the one where it's like, okay, test your theology. How'd you do? Okay, here's the answers, right? Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. This starts to characterize the book of Daniel. He is going to spend most of the rest of the book on his face. Like every time you see one of the prophets or anyone having an encounter with an angel or any form of heavenly being, you'll see immediately fall on their face, and most of them try to worship. Daniel doesn't. He's good in that. That's one of the accolades of him. Most everyone else tries to worship the angel and has to be told, no, don't worship me. I'm a servant like you. And so he's going to spend the rest of the book pretty much on his face. But he said to me, understand, son of man, which is a term that's used of Daniel. We've seen that several times, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Okay, so it's not just this, but it says, now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood me upright, and he said, look, I am making known to you. So he passes out. And he wakes him up, and he said, look, man, I'm trying to tell you what's happening. Stick with us. I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, and that the time of indignation is the Great Tribulation, right? That term is going to be used all throughout Old Testament and New. The time of indignation, or the Great Indignation. For at the appointed time, the end shall be. Okay, now this is somewhat separate. So this is like so he says, the ram which you saw, having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. Oh, we got that one right. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is that first king. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power. Oh, dang, we nailed it, right? Like, it's almost like we read this before. But you can see, if all you're doing is tracking through chapter 7, that you can get there on your own. You can get there just with a historical perspective, but Gabriel goes and clarifies. So then he goes on to say, and in the latter time, so those things being true, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise having fierce features, or fierce countenance, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, right? Someone else gives him his power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive, and he shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Through his cunning he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes. But he shall be broken without human means. Right? These are consistent descriptions of the Antichrist, that he's full of pride. He's rises to power through deceit, not through riches. He's a peacemaker, but he exalts himself in his heart. And he, most importantly, makes war against the holy people, right? And that's not specific to the Jews. That's the remnant. That's whoever that is. Yeah.
Verse 25, it says, he shall cause what?
Deceit. Deceit?
Deceit, okay.
Yeah.
King James says craft.
Yeah, okay. I'm in New King James, but he shall cause craft. I'll have to look that up and see how they got to deceit, but
Well, I was thinking
like,
Satan's power, which is like witchcraft or whatever. I mean, it's a
well,
illusion or what.
yeah, lying wonders. That's definitely an attribute of his. So under his rule, so these descriptions of this being that's coming, he's saying that the little horn that you're talking about, he labels that as something being yet future, as though that being this person who will come out of these areas and shall conquer through deceit, and these are all attributes of the Antichrist. And the vision of the evening and the mornings, of the Erev and the Boker, which was told is true. It will happen. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to the many days in the future. That statement is interesting to me. Daniel is told, don't try to understand this. I just told you about the ram and the he-goat. You get to understand that, but seal up this last part. It's not for you, right? And so when people talk about the book of Revelation as, well, we don't get into that. That's a sealed book. Very much the opposite. It's literally the revelation. And the name itself is the opposite of sealing. It's revealing. But there are prophecies that even the prophet was told, you don't get to understand. These are for the end times. And now that we live in a time where these things start seeming to make sense, you can almost use that as a barometer. You can see how there's several sealed prophecies related to the Antichrist, and we live in a time where you can understand how someone could, if he was not stopped, would have destroyed all life on earth. When there were sticks and swords, you can't imagine that. That doesn't make any sense. You can't wipe out all life on earth with sticks and swords. We can now understand what it means to have a world leader that could have wiped out all life on earth. We got several of them right now, and those are, as these concepts about the Antichrist are, as the layers of it are peeled out, and you can kind of see how these things would play out in the society and the world in which we live. That is the unsealing, right? That is, these things were sealed until such a time as they might make sense. And so we are living in that time. You can see.
When they found these, they were sealed?
What do you mean?
When they said seal it up,
no,
they actually sealed scrolls?
Oh, good. That's a great question. No, the concept is don't try to elaborate, because other areas you'll see Daniel try to further describe. And then I saw this, and he's telling him, this isn't for you to understand. You're not going to elaborate further. Shut the book. Close the book. This is it.
Now, Daniel is writing this down?
He records it. He's recording after the fact. He's looking backwards, and as he records all of his various visions, they're always in the rear view. They're always written as in the past tense. I saw, and then I looked, and there was. So yes, he is writing it, but it's not like narrating like John does. He writes in the present tense, and I looked and beheld, and here it was. All his stuff is like as if he's dictating in real time. Daniel's just looking backwards. So seal up the visions, and Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. I love that. Afterwards, so he had to wake him up to tell him this last part, like, come on, man, get up. And then he just faints right back and was sick for days. And I rose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. Right? That, like, the fact that these things are coming to light, and you can do this in Isaiah and Ezekiel and several other ones, the dry bones prophecy. Shoot, that one's sealed. But we know exactly what that is. We saw the nation of Israel go from dry bones to a living flesh. We saw it 60 years ago. It's no longer sealed. So without a doubt. Yeah, the valley of dry bones. Yeah. I will say to you, dry bones, take flesh. It's talking about the nation being reestablished. And yeah, it's very specific to the nation, like growing life again, where there was nothing but death. It was.
We didn't really get to see the people and the veins and all that stuff come up.
He might have. I mean, like he doesn't understand what he's seeing. Again, it's sealed. So he sees literally bones coming to life, and he's writing down, I saw bones, and all of a sudden they were knit together into flesh. He doesn't understand what he's seeing. That's kind of the point. It's sealed. We know exactly what that's a reference to. We watched it, right? We saw, not in our lifetime, but, yeah.
He said, but nobody understood it. It sounds like he tried to
talked to people.
Yeah, it's sealed. He's a prophet. He wrote it in the book, and he's probably he wrote the story of it. He probably told it to anyone who would listen, and no one could figure it out. But we're sitting here like, who the heck are we? We're like some dorks with Google, and we can figure it out, right? And because we're living in a time where this stuff makes sense, where Valley of Dry Bones is in the past, where the Gog and Magog invasion, you could see Russia allying with 6 Arabic states to come confederate and go to war against Israel. That doesn't make any sense in biblical times, right? Why would you have other countries that don't have the same religion allying and an army invading through your land, and instead of trying to repel them, you join them? And they happen to be all 6 Arabic states that are on Russia's path to Israel. We got that. We got good maps now. We can see exactly why and how that would happen. These things are like, they didn't know what they were writing. They just saw visions, and they wrote them down, and now it's like, all right, yep.
The valley of dry bones and the people rising up could happen again when the Antichrist attacks Jerusalem and a tenth of the city falls.
And they reestablish.
But that's right before Jesus returns and they recognize their Messiah. And then there will be people who are coming alive again from the dead.
Yeah, I'm not sure that.
Verses. Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's see. He told Jesus, it's in the red ink. Jesus told the disciples that the 12 of them, that they would judge the 12 tribes of
Yep.
Israel. Okay? And the martyrs, I believe, will be given the rule of the city, because they have proven themselves that they would lay down their life for their Savior. For his sake, the gospel's sake. That, I don't know.
Yeah, I have to see how it ties to the Valley of Dry Bones. I definitely, absolutely, without a doubt, when he returns, the dead will rise. All the way going back to Job, the oldest.
But I'm not talking about the rapture, because this talks about the people being in the land again.
Yep, yeah, and he's going to establish his rule, and
I'm talking about after the rapture, when the land of Israel, where for 1,000 years the other nations need to come and worship on the feast day.
yeah, but Job's not a saint. He's not going to be raptured. Job is a Jew. He's not in the rapture, but Job. Yep. And the oldest prophecy in the Bible says, I know that in that day I will see him. My flesh with my eyes, I will behold the Messiah, right? So, and somehow literally revived from the dead. That he, when he says the dead will rise, that's not rapture specific. Like the saints will be called and will have physical bodies somehow. Once again, we've gone over that. I have no idea how, but there's very clearly a physical resurrection, and Job prophesies that I will see him with my own eyes, not another's. I will see him in the flesh. And that's like a wild statement when it was written before Moses was even, around. But okay, so let me jump. You have these prophecies that have, this is going to happen with the Persian Empire, this is going to happen with the Greek Empire, this is going to happen with the Roman Empire, and then in the latter day there will be a guy that does X, Y, Z, right? And so the purpose of these statements about the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, I mean, it has sort of a dual purpose. One is just to know that what you're reading is inspired, right? You can prove without a doubt that the Bible is inspired with nothing else, but we said, use Daniel 7. I can show you Daniel 11. I can show you the Bible is inspired without a doubt. It was written down, and then it happened in the order and the manner in which it happened. So there's the confidence in that this is the Word of God, but there's also this idea of if this came true, like almost all prophecy has an aspect of this. God almost always reveals things in this way. If this came true, then you can trust that this is going to happen. Things that are now in the past to us are always, I keep saying always, are usually intermixed with things that are yet future. And the idea behind the narrative, they call it near and far prophecy, is that when you see these things come to pass, know that these things will. And usually the more unlikely is the thing we've already seen, is describing the rise and fall of nations years before they even were formed, right? If that happened, then you can trust that there will be a dude that comes along and persecutes the Jews, right? You see how simple that is to believe if someone just told you in advance all the world empires that would just come and would rise and fall? Okay, so now trust me that there's going to be someone who does these things. So it's always the harder thing. And this always brings to my mind what Christ said when the man's lowered through the roof and he says, your sins are forgiven, right? And when they ask him, they said, only God has the power to forgive sins. And he says, so that you will know, what's harder? What's harder to do? To say your sins are forgiven, to say get up and walk? Obviously, it's get up and walk because you'll know if it's true. And so he says, so the reason I say get up and walk is so that you will know that the Son of Man has power to forgive sins. Like, I do the harder thing so that you know I can do the easier thing. I can do the thing that I can't possibly prove. And so it's the same thing here. It's like I give you history in advance so that you know that these things that really matter to me, the Spirit, that really matter from a spiritual standpoint, will come to pass. And so every time when we look at prophecy, it's important to look at it through that lens. It's like a down payment. He gives you an earnest of what's going to happen. I'm putting money down to show you that I'm serious about what's going to happen in the future. I'll tell you that, I'll name Cyrus by name and tell you the history of his conquest so that you'll know that when I say the Messiah is coming on this day, trust me, it's going to happen. And so that's kind of the emphasis of this. But there is a very weird emphasis on the Antichrist in the Bible. Like, you can't escape it. Why is there so much focus in prophecy about this coming world leader that will bring about the end times? Why does it's something that literally that's what the rest of the book of Daniel will really be about, is prophesying the end time. Why does Christ call him out when they ask him, what will be the sign of your end times? He just starts talking about the Antichrist. Very little about himself, starts talking about the Antichrist. There's all of this prophecy about this coming world leader. I personally think it's in there for the Jews. I personally think I won't be here, but now when you're trying to lead these people to recognition of their Messiah, you lay out the things that are going to happen to them in that time. And so that they pick up the scripture and they say, oh my gosh, this just happened in the same manner. Now I can believe, right? I think these prophecies that are near and far are not for us. I don't believe I could care less who the Antichrist is, and I could care less what his signs are. I'm not on the Antichrist watch because I don't plan to be here. I believe the Bible very specifically tells me I'll be long gone, but I think I think the Holy Spirit goes out of his way in several instances to show details about the Antichrist, because these books are still going to be sitting there after I'm long gone, and then there's going to be his chosen people looking for their Messiah, and they have the roadmap. When they see him again stand in the Holy of Holies, they're going to pick up the book and say,
They didn't believe it before, why would they believe it now?
well, that's what Stephen says.
But the Lord's going to have mercy and lift the blindness.
Spiritual blindness has been given to the nation of Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. What is the fullness? The last of the Gentiles is saved, and then shall the man of sin be revealed, right? So that's an order. Go ahead.
Yes, he tells us a lot about the Antichrist, but he tells us to watch for him, Jesus.
Exactly. Yep. And again, we're indwelt by the Holy Spirit. Like, we are going to be taken by him. We're going to be one with him. And even those promises, yes, I'm going to tell you about these for your own edification, but who are you looking for? You're going to see him, but keep your eyes, you're going to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. That's the second coming. And again, I believe that's for the Jews. I'm gone. I'm long out of the picture. I think there's these treasures that are left that were put in the Old Testament and in the New Testament for the purpose of leading the Jews to their Messiah, because the final prerequisite of his second coming is the nation of Israel standing in the rock city of Petra and singing, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, save now. Right? And as soon as they do, something leads them to that. And I believe that's what all these are, is a roadmap. If you are a faithful Jew in that time, you can look at it and say, check, 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 and then they point to Christ. When you start following the breadcrumbs, they point to Christ, and it leads the nation to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that is what Satan is diametrically opposed to, is trying to prevent. But I don't know that these prophecies have much value to me, but you can't escape the fact that the Antichrist is just all throughout the text and used as a mile marker over and over and over, because it's going to be what ushers in the second coming. And you can get into, we did a whole study on this. If you remember, in between Revelation 13 and 14, we did a whole study of the Antichrist. If you're interested in it, I do find it fascinating. Like, the names of the Antichrist have incredible significance from both a prophetic standpoint. There's many of them. It goes into such detail that it tells us his name, right? Why? Why does that matter if we're not going to be here? It gives you the name of him. It gives you titles that he will have and attributes of him. It gives you a physical description of him, that his eye will be darkened and his right arm will be withered and clean, dried up. And we're getting really specific on this guy. And I can't think of any purpose other than they are deposits that are made by the Holy Spirit for that end time. They're meant to be mile markers for the Jews that lead them to the Messiah, that lead them to their final recognition. And Kelly just asked the question of all questions. Well, they missed him the first time. Why would they see him the second time? Spiritual blindness wasn't put in place until after they rejected the Messiah. Jesus is standing and says, because you did not know this your hour, spiritual blindness is put in. So that's not why they missed him the first time. But when Stephen's stoned in Acts, he gives the Sanhedrin, the highest order of priests in the land, he gives them a lecture on the Jews. He teaches them about the Jews. They call that chutzpah, right? To go to the highest order of your government and lecture on the thing they know best. But he goes through and he starts saying, starting at Abraham, they always screw it up the first time. Abraham was called and did not follow. Moses, he starts going through all the patriarchs, that the first time they miss it, the second time they get it right. And right before he gets to Christ, they stone him, right? But you can see the path, what he's going for. That is the nation of Israel. It's all a type. The nation is a type. They missed it the first time. The second time they'll get it right. And so he calls very specific, and that's a new believer. Most people believe he was like in his teens, and he's lecturing the Sanhedrin on the history of Israel. But they will. The second time they will recognize him. That blindness will be lifted. But what leads them there, I believe, is these breadcrumbs. I believe they go back to their scripture and say, oh my gosh, it was there all along. And we're living in the midst of it. We've seen each of these things, and these describe that man. So